Good morning, and welcome to the Beaufort Regional Chamber's 2024 Economic Forecast. My name is Graham Summerall. I am this year's chairman of the Board of Directors for the Chamber. This annual event is a pulse check of our community and a benchmarking effort for our collective progress towards a vision of economic prosperity. This is the 5th year of the Economic Forecast, a great milestone for our chamber as our team stays focused on supporting growth within our local community. As you look around, you'll see leaders from every aspect of Beaufort are present, and thank you all for being here. The chamber is able to hold programs like this thanks to the investments of all of our members and because of supportive corporate citizens who have stepped up to sponsor today's event. Our presenting sponsor this morning is the Coastal Community Foundation. Our Bright Spot sponsor is 303 Associates. Our Regional Prosperity Report sponsor is the Beaufort Jasper County Realtors. Our breakfast sponsor this morning is Beaufort County Economic Development Center, along with other sponsors that made today possible: Alpha Graphics, Beaufort Port Royal Convention and Visitors Bureau, Beaufort Memorial Hospital, Carolina Air, USCB, and the town of Yemassee. I'd like to thank USCB for hosting us today here at the Center of Arts, SK Associates for their videography and photography support and stitching today together, and the County Channel for broadcasting today's presentation. This morning's welcome message comes from Dr. Al Panu, who is the Chancellor of USCB and our host this morning. Dr. Panu.
Good morning. Good morning. Fantastic. Well, on behalf of the faculty, staff, and students of the University of South Carolina, Beaufort, welcome to the Beaufort Regional Chamber of Commerce 2024 Economic Forecast. This is the 5th year of the Economic Forecast, one of the Chamber's premier events. We are truly honored to host you today here in the Center for the Arts on our historic Beaufort campus. As you know, USCB has 2 other campuses in Bluffton and Hilton Head Island, but it is in Beaufort where it all began. In fact, our roots here reach back more than 200 years to the founding of Beaufort College by community leaders in 1795. So you can say that we have been part of the city's economic development since the days of George Washington. It has not always been smooth sailing through the tides of history, but local support for the college has been resilient and steadfast over the centuries. Today, about 150 USCB students call the Beaufort campus home. This is also home base for USCB's dynamic academic programs in studio art, history, African American studies, cybersecurity, and marine biology. And this campus is where we chose to house our Beaufort College Honors Program, which attracts some of the best and brightest students to live and learn in this community. All told, more than 260 USCB students take classes on the Beaufort campus. Also, USCB provides important cultural events and educational opportunities for those blessed enough to live in Beaufort and those informed enough to visit and explore this beautiful and historic place. Our Osher Lifelong Learning Institute provides intellectual and social program for local adult 50 and older. The Institute for the Study of Reconstruction Era contributes to the greater understanding of our past, ultimately our present. The Sea Island Center Gallery serves as catalyst of creative inquiry and exploration in the arts. And in this building, we host plays and concerts open to the public, including national touring companies and our storied chamber music series, now in its 44th year. I should also point out that in a few days, visitors from around the country and the world will sit where you are now sitting for the 18th annual Beaufort International Film Festival. It is an extraordinary event and one that the countless festivals that make this region a special place, it's one of those. And all of this means that Beaufort is a vibrant and thriving community with even greater economic impact. So much so that one organization, the collegeranker.com, has named Beaufort #1 college town in South Carolina. That's right. I'd like all of you to know that USCB is very proud to be a cornerstone of this community intellectually and economically in any other ways. We are committed to building tomorrow's workforce and supporting the region's economy. We are proud to be your neighbor. Thank you and welcome to the forum.
Thank you, Dr. Perdue. To kick off this morning's program, please welcome Courtney Worrell, the CEO of 303 Associates.
Thank you, Graham, and good morning, everyone. I'm Courtney Worrell, and along with the team at 303 Associates, we're proud to support this morning's Chamber's economic forecast. For 25 years, 303 Associates has invested in commercial, retail, office, multifamily, and hospitality projects that promote the economic well-being of our community. We focus on infill and redevelopment projects because we believe that it is essential to properly plan and manage growth to minimize the negative impacts to sprawl. We believe in the Beaufort region. We cherish this community's rich history and pristine environment, and we work to build a sustainable economy for the future. That's why we're proud to sponsor the annual Beaufort Bright Spots video produced by Sean and Tony with SK Signs, Designs, and Marketing. This highlight reel features many of the investments, the advancements, and the achievements that are helping build a prosperous Beaufort region.
Beaufort Bright Spots is a way to showcase many of the highlights and accomplishments within our region.
Let's start with a glimpse of the state's bright spots in business. At the end of 2023, South Carolina ranked #2 in the country for new business investment conditions. Our state's GDP is up $5 billion year over year, making it now 6% higher than pre-pandemic levels. Businesses and residents throughout the nation are benefiting from a 5% decrease in inflation from its peak just the year before.
Here in our region, over 400 new business licenses were granted in 2023. That's in addition to the county's overall increase of 635 business licenses last year. It's as important as ever to build our local business-to-consumer and business-to-business networks to keep as much money flowing throughout our local economy as possible.
To recognize a job well done and as motivation for future progress, let's dive into the bright spots from key sectors around our region in the past year.
Economic development remains a priority for Beaufort County, City of Beaufort, and the greater Beaufort region. We look to diversify the economy and transform lives by creating good jobs in the region. And we work very well with the Beaufort Regional Chamber of Commerce as a critical partner. We're here in the landing pad. This past year, we've hosted companies from around the world. We have companies presently in from Croatia and Japan. SkyDrive, one of the ones that has brought a lot of notoriety to economic development as City of Beaufort and Beaufort County, is making its home here in the landing pad and looks to create its headquarters in South Carolina. We've also worked with Stoneworks, and they've added solar capacity at their plant as they work with Sustain SC. We've worked with LD Berger at Greenline, where we are seeing their plant expand and investments being made and great benefits coming to our neighbors. Gay Fish Company is another great example of us paying attention to heritage and cultural significantly industries in Beaufort. So we're really happy to be working with them, and the Department of Ag, along with the Economic Development Corp, will be announcing grants to that company. It's been a great year, but what's really exciting is what lays ahead. We see the second spec building. Investors are stepping forward to build that, and I would say that the upcoming year should be a great year for the greater Beaufort region. Thank you.
This past year, the travel and tourism industry saw sustained growth over previous years and then contributed to an impressive $1.4 billion annual economy. Along with the Beaufort Area Hospitality Association, the Convention and Visitor Bureau hosted the annual tourism summit, which we provided some new numbers and revenues spend from visitors across the board. Visitors account for a quarter of the total spend in our local economy, providing a wealth of impact to our local businesses. Hunting Island State Park, along with Paris Island Marine graduations, continue to be top visitor draws, as does Fripp Island. This past year, Fripp Island, under new ownership, acquired Camelot Equestrian Center, and it plans to expand to offer a wide array of attraction and opportunities there on the islands. Local festivals continue to be a big draw for both locals and visitors, celebrating our heritage and our culture. And that poses to be our best opportunity for expansion going forward as we move forward, as we further the experience for our low country, but also provide a great base for our small businesses that depend on a vibrant visitor economy.
Here at Beaufort Memorial, we're very excited about the past year we just had and how we've grown with Beaufort County and the community. We've broken ground on many projects, such as the $24 million OR renovation. With that renovation at the hospital, we'll be adding 2 state-of-the-art ORs and modernizing all of our technology. We've seen our surgical volumes grow over the last 3 to 4 years and welcomed many new surgeons to the market. Speaking of new providers to the market, we welcomed 14 last year alone, to include primary care and other specialty areas. We continue to focus on workforce development. We know that's a big priority for everyone in the community. And we've done things such as home buyer assistance programs. Last year, we helped 8 employees buy new homes in the community. We have the PATH program, and we started the coding program on top of the patient care tech program, the CMA program, and the phlebotomy program. And we want to expand that into other areas such as surgical technology and sterilization opportunities within the PATH program. This year, looking forward in terms of workforce development, we break ground on our new Child Care Center, which will not only be able to have 100 kids on campus at the hospital, but will help reduce the cost of child care to our employees as we look towards what is going on in the market and how do we recruit and retain these employees and these healthcare workers. We also break ground on the new nursing school in February as a partnership with USCB, and hopes to train more nurses and retain more nurses to Beaufort Memorial Hospitals and others in the healthcare sector. We look forward to our growth south of the Broad. We've acquired a Island Imaging Center on Hilton Head most recently, and we hope to break ground on new facilities in the upcoming year to serve not only north of the Broad population or Beaufort and Port Royal and Ladies Island, but also Bluffton and Okatee as we grow that way. It's a very exciting time in healthcare and at Beaufort Memorial. We look forward to growing with the community and with the Chamber in the coming years.
In the past year, several partners in the community have advanced the mission of building a tech industry here in Beaufort. At the Beaufort Digital Corridor, our membership increased with the majority of new to Beaufort tech businesses. More cybersecurity scholarships were granted than ever before, And we reached almost 100 events supporting entrepreneurs and 100 participants in our Women in Tech group. You're invited to join us at the 3rd annual TechStars Startup Weekend event during Tech Week, which kicks off with the 3rd annual South Coast Cyber Summit on March 18th. Cybersecurity efforts have received a big boost last year as the need for a trained workforce continues to grow. University of South Carolina Beaufort and Technical College of the Lowcountry have successfully launched facilities and programs for associate's and bachelor's degrees in cybersecurity. USCB held the ribbon cutting of the new cybersecurity lab, and the National Science Foundation granted $1 million for an innovative engine in maritime cybersecurity. Starting a local pipeline of prospects for these programs, the Beaufort County School District is a key partner, especially through their MedTech 7 program. They also received NSA's Gen Cyber grant for teachers to mentor and teach students about cybersecurity, both in the classroom and at summer camps. Keeping up with modern demands for post-secondary education, TCL completed construction of the Hub for modern, streamlined student services, an investment on the Beaufort campus. Now, they look to utilize $10 million in funding from the state to establish a regional workforce training center. There is great opportunity in the year ahead to advance the tech and talent ecosystem in the region of Beaufort.
Beaufort County voters overwhelmingly approved the $439 million school bond referendum that will fund projects like a new Ladies Island Middle School and a new gym at Riverview Charter in our region. District-wide, the bond will be used to expand career and technical education facilities and school safety enhancements. This past year, we celebrated the opening of the new Robert Smalls Leadership Academy and a new gymnasium for St. Helena Elementary. Academically, we celebrated the district's record gains in English and language arts on the state assessments, as well as a historic number of National Merit Scholars. Beaufort County School District maintains alignment with the South Carolina Department of Education's profile of a South Carolina graduate to prepare students for the workforce or post-secondary education. This includes our partnership with USCB and TCL for dual enrollment, and the last year over 1,500 industry certifications that were earned. These advancements require a strong teacher workforce, and we are proud that Beaufort County now ranks #1 in the starting teacher salary in our state. Our educators were delighted to participate in last year's Educator Appreciation event that was hosted by the Chamber at the new Wheezy Education Pavilion opened by the Port Royal Sound Foundation in 2023. Schools around the region have a great responsibility to provide a quality education along with great opportunity to develop the minds and the abilities of pre-kindergarten students to high school graduates. Children are our future, and children are the bright spots.
"2023 was a fantastic year. We've had an amazing amount of support at the federal, the state, and the local level. We've had a number of accomplishments here, as many of you are aware. With the grace of the governor and the secretary of the South Carolina Department of Veterans Affairs, we were able to secure $9 million for the local community. Specifically, we secured money for a multi-use pathway for the Marine Corps Air Station to Laurel Bay, and we were also able to secure funding for a living shoreline to protect Parris Island from the ravages of erosion, sea level rise, and climate change. Additionally, South Carolina passed the Military Spouse Licensing Relief Act. What this does is it creates the conditions that allow spouses that are coming from other states to have South Carolina recognize their licenses, makes it easier for them to work. Other bright spots are Beaufort County entered into an IGSA with the United States Marine Corps for engineering. Port Royal has got an IGSA, Intergovernmental Service Agreement, with the Marine Corps for motorcycle safety. The Open Land Trust has secured 488 acres to protect against encroachment of the Marine Corps Air Station. The Chamber continues to do their work on the Naval Hospital relocation plan. 2024 is going to be a phenomenal year.
And this just demonstrates that South Carolina in general, and Beaufort in particular, is a great place to live.
All of the accomplishments highlighted as Beaufort's bright spots are big wins for our region. Monitoring the pulse of the community is a key function of the Chamber.
In addition to our advocacy efforts and sharing the latest information with Chamber members, the Chamber held over 60 events last year that fostered connections and created unique opportunities for members. Thanks to all who participated and engaged with community issues. Special efforts like the Low Country Land Council, Military Enhancement Committee, Defense Community Partnership, and Community Advancement Council met regularly to keep track of progress.
Additionally, the Chamber hosted this economic forecast, the legislative reception, educator and military appreciation days, and of course, the annual Civitas Awards. Congratulations to these Civitas Award winners and the recipient of the Lifetime Leadership Award, Dick Stewart. His legacy in the community goes way beyond the buildings that 303 Associates have preserved. Dick's investments and involvement have empowered and shaped numerous civic, environmental, arts, and economic development entities within our community.
Speaking of leadership, the Leadership Beaufort program is rounding out its 39th year with a big milestone ahead. Kudos to all who have been involved over the last 4 decades as we strive to empower, inform, and engage citizens.
With several changes in leadership roles around the region, we are looking forward to working together to better serve the citizens of Beaufort, Port Royal, and the Sea Islands, making sure that they thrive and the businesses that employ them thrive. That is our mission.
With every conversation and every connection, we're making progress on our vision to create economic prosperity for today and future generations. You are working hard, and we are working for you. Thanks everyone for these bright spots and for your support of the Beaufort Regional Chamber of Commerce.
Thanks to everyone who played a part in these incredible achievements. We're all part of the same community, and these successes wouldn't be possible without the dedication and hard work of each and every one of you. Now, please join me in welcoming to the stage Mark Davis Cody, who's the chair of the Realtors Board. Thank you to the Realtors Board for their invaluable sponsorship of this report.
Thank you, Graham, for the opportunity to share a little bit about the Beaufort Jasper County Realtors. I'm Mark Davis Cody. I am the 2024 president of the Beaufort Jasper County Realtors, chartered by the National Association of Realtors in 1962. Our association has spent the last 62 years advocating for homeownership for all and serving as the voice of private property rights at the local, state, and national level. Homeownership not only promotes wealth building, but it provides economic stability and community pride. And we're proud to play a role in making that happen. Being engaged and involved in our community is one of our core missions, and as such, we are proud to partner with the Chamber in bringing this event to you today. As realtors, we understand the value of data and the crucial role it plays in planning and preparing for the future. Data helps empower our elected officials, community leaders, and businesses with valuable insight and is the foundation for informed decision making. Because of this, it is indeed our honor to be the sponsor of the Regional Prosperity Dashboard. And now Megan will tell us a little bit more about the dashboard. Thank you.
Good morning, happy Friday. I used to have dance recitals on this stage, but I won't subject you to that this morning. The overall message of the Bright Spots video was to instill a sense of optimism. It's to build on our achievements and to capitalize on the opportunities that we all have ahead. Our goal in delivering this next group of information is to give data and facts for you all to make decisions at your business and through local governments. Let's gather some context within the state to get us started. The state's economic climate affects us directly. Dr. Joey Von Nessen, economist at the University of South Carolina, reported these statistics late last year. The state's 14% growth in population was twice the average of the United States during the past 12 years. Beaufort ranked 10th for growth among the counties. There are still counties who are growing faster than us. Here we share with you a reminder of the term cost burdened. That means that 30% or more of household income is used for housing expenses. In Beaufort, 34% of mortgage holders are cost burdened. Compare that to the state average of 25%. 53% of renters in our region are cost burdened, compared to the state average of 50%. So we are higher in both categories. Cost of living and cost of housing are a barrier. It's not new news, but it's worth repeating and sharing data. So today we're going to focus on this region. This is who we represent as a chamber. This map shows the 4 census districts in our region, the half of the county that is north of Broad River, from Yemassee and I-95, out to the coast at Fripp Island and everywhere in between. 91% of our region's population lives in either the Beaufort Port Royal District or the St. Helena Ladies Island District. Let's start with a look at our population. Each section will start with a heat map that we'll look at quickly today. Here's the one related to population. Population is heaviest in the areas with the dark green. So that includes the Paris Island area, Shell Point area, Broad River area, downtown area, Ladies Island, and Fripp Island. The St. Helena Ladies Island District was the fastest growing district between 2010 and 2023. The Beaufort Port Royal District is projected to be the fastest growing region in the period from today up till 2028. Bless you. The region is on an upward growth trajectory. No surprise, right? Average annual growth between 2023 and 2028 is projected to be greater than the US and equivalent to our state. Growth is expected to be highest in the areas closest to Broad River, and we could see upwards of a 15% increase in population over the next 5 years. Planning for growth in key areas and the capacity needed for roads, utilities, other services will be necessary to accommodate demand. And it's important to note that while we're focused on northern Beaufort County, commute patterns show that tens of thousands of people move in and around the county every day for work. Now let's look at our region's income data. Of note, while looking at this map, South Carolina as a state has been less affluent than national average. But we see that trend with it changing as the Southeast becomes the nation's leading section. Our region north of Broad has a lower median household income than south of Broad. There is some skew here because of military pay. The darker areas of this map reflect higher income, noticeably the downtown area, northern Ladies Island, and Dawtaw. This slide shows us that the Beaufort region is slightly higher than South Carolina in median income. The 5-year projections for our region and our state in general are relatively flat due to the steep incline we've seen over the past few years. Median income in the St. Helena and Ladies Island district is significantly higher than the other 3. Now think back to that term cost burdened. 30%, which would be the threshold for cost burden, of the median income at $69,000 is just over $20,000. And that means that $1,700 per month spent on housing equates to cost burden. $1,700 a month for our median income folks. Give that some thought. Now let's look at our region's age demographics. The tan areas in our region show the youngest areas. Our workforce at MCAS, Laurel Bay, and Parris Island are keeping us young. Here's the age distribution currently. Note that the index number of 100 means equal to state average. So where we are below 100, that's where we are lagging the state. For 2023, we're relatively even in the early years. We're ahead of South Carolina average for ages 20 to 24. The high concentration in this range again reflects military. Then, we are severely lagging in the 25 to 54 age group. This is the prime working age, and our missing middle is proven in this data. Finally, we are ahead of state average in all age groups 55 and over. Because of the majority of recent growth is in the latter age groups, the region's median age has climbed to 46.1 years. That's compared to 41.2 years as the average age in South Carolina and 40 nationally. Projections show that the trend is likely to continue if we don't create opportunity for workforce age groups to work here and afford to live here. Over the next 5 years, it's mostly flat in the ages 0 to 24. Unfortunately, there is not much projected change in the workforce ages. We will still see the lower percentages in the chart and the big dip in the graph. Interestingly, projection of ages 55 to 64 drops to below average compared to 2023. And 85 and older nearly doubles for our region and is expected to grow here more than the state average is expected to grow. That makes the end of that yellow line even steeper. Percentage of the 65 plus age cohort is projected to increase in the Beaufort region from 21% just at the end of 2023 to 27% in 2028. This will continue to increase demand for services and healthcare sectors, among others. The opportunity to level this line, the yellow line on the far graph, is to diversify the economy, create more and higher paying jobs, attract workers with those jobs and our quality of life, and give them a chance to find housing that's affordable to help them get settled. By show of hands, is there a business in the room that doesn't currently need more skilled workforce? Now let's dive further into the labor force. Of note, this information here does not include military employees. The civilian labor force line represents the total possible workforce, and the employment line is the actual number of working individuals. This is a good news slide. The graph and chart show that our region is at a very low level of unemployment. It would be difficult to get much lower, and Beaufort is currently lower than South Carolina on unemployment rate. The civilian labor force here has increased every year since 2010, except for a very slight dip during the pandemic peak. Labor force and employment are now better than pre-pandemic levels. Let's look at the array of sectors for the labor force. By the way, TWIU, the first one there is transportation and warehousing. I looked to Laura because she taught us that and surprised us with some statistics on it last year. We're much lower than the US average in manufacturing and wholesale trade. We're higher than average in retail trade and services. The services group, it's especially noteworthy because it's the largest percentage, but also tends to be the sector with the lowest paying jobs. What is included in this services sector? Hospitality is the leading area, with healthcare following next. Interesting on this graph is that education and management, which is included in the services sector as well, is at the lowest percentage for our county. Nearly 75% of employment in Beaufort County is in services and retail trade, compared to 70% nationally. Our region is also above average in the amount of workers in the arts, entertainment, and recreation, and hospitality sectors. Let's end with the sector here that actually comes up first in all of our lives, educating our workforce in their youth and preparing them to become adults. Here is one more heat map that shows the spread of education levels. The darker shades in this map represent more advanced education levels. Dive into some data. Education attainment at each level has risen in the obtaining a diploma or a degree, and it only decreases in the categories for no diploma and some college since 2010. Projections show that the levels are likely to be the same in 5 years as they are now. The Beaufort region mirrors the state education levels. In our region, Sheldon and Yemassee have a lower percentage of college degrees and a higher percentage of diplomas. The region is close to the state and national profiles in terms of educational achievement. There is a noticeable variance within our region. Ladies Island and St. Helena District has 46% with college degree or higher, compared to 11% in Yemassee. This is my final slide. These are the overall implications. We highlight 4 key headlines here. Overall growth is robust and healthy. Concentrated growth in certain areas will place a disproportionate pressure to provide housing infrastructure and services. Second, the current and projected age distribution reflects underrepresentation of population and critical earning years. Third, incomes are unevenly distributed across the region. And that, again, creates implications for future growth patterns. And fourth, incomes reflect the nature of our local economy. The impact of the armed services is clear. In the private sector, there's an overrepresentation of jobs that are lower paid. We must attract new industry and create a built-in skilled labor force. Now I'm going to give credit to someone special, which I was supposed to do before I read that binder. The Chamber launched this dashboard as a new tool for our members and partners with a study conducted by the Darla Moore School of Business, my alma mater. We're now able to update the data here in town thanks to help from a friend who, of course, we met through a Chamber program. Richard Tunstall is our data guru. He is the founder and principal for the firm Market Analysis and Research, and I enjoyed working with him to aggregate and analyze this data. His firm provides demographic and site location consulting to investors and municipalities, and we're fortunate to have his ongoing support. Thank you, Richard. That wraps up today's presentation of the dashboard. However, this in a more extended format, plus Dr. Ulrich and Ms. Latham's slides, are already all posted on our website. We will send them out to Chamber members. And we've also scheduled a deep dive into this data, which will be more lengthy, and we'll have Richard on with us that day. And that will be March 1st at 9:30 a.m. through our Community Advancement Council meeting, and that is virtual. So you get to log in and dive in and ask your own questions. We hope this helps paint a picture of where we're at and where we're headed, so we can all collaborate and communicate effectively to seize opportunity and make important, informed decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. As you've just said and shown, the data trends of continued growth and cause for progress in key areas to support our current citizens, our growing citizens, and to build our workforce. Now to introduce this morning's keynote speakers, I'm pleased to welcome Melissa Levesque, Senior Vice President and Chief Strategy Officer of the Coastal Community Foundation, our presenting sponsor for the economic forecast this morning. With offices in North Charleston and Beaufort, the Coastal Community Foundation works in communities up and down the coastal South Carolina to create equity, opportunity, and well-being by investing resources and uniting people. Please welcome Melissa.
Thank you so much. The Coastal Community Foundation is proud to partner with the Beaufort Regional Chamber on today's event because we do share many priorities. We've learned through community conversations and hard data analysis over the past 8 to 10 years that education, economic mobility, health and physical well-being, coastal resilience, culture and inclusion, as well as strong philanthropic leadership, are necessary pillars for strong communities. They're interconnected, and we realize that it's going to require collaboration among public, private, and philanthropic sectors to do this. That's one of the reasons why Coastal Community Foundation has been physically located with offices in Beaufort County for 25 years as of this November. We have over $125 million of endowed assets for the Beaufort region because we believe in the community here and the economic resilience of our partners here. Now, to start the heart of our program. Today's keynote speaker is Dr. Laura Ulrich, a senior economist for the Carolinas region of the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. She's based in Charlotte, and her home is in South Carolina. Many of you saw her last year at the economic forecast in this same room. She's back by popular demand, but also because her expertise is so relevant to the issues we've been discussing today and we saw in the data presentation. Her research interests include higher education, local and state level tax analysis, and the economic impact of local development. She's earned a bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Georgia. I'm very proud, I'm a UGA graduate as well, and a master's and doctorate in economics from the University of Tennessee. Previously, Ulrich was the Associate Dean for Undergraduate Programs and a Professor of Economics at Winthrop University in Rock Hill. Dr. Ulrich's colleague joining us for the first time is Sierra Latham, our Senior Research Analyst with the Regional and Community Analysis Team at the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. In her role, she studies emerging economic and community development trends affecting communities in North and South Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. While she specializes in housing, her research interests also include community development, equitable access to economic opportunity, public finance, and mission-driven investments. She earned her bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Mary Washington, a master's in applied economics from Georgetown University, and a master's in public policy from the University of Chicago. She previously served as the director of a statewide affordable housing pilot program in Indiana, the demographer for the city of Alexandria, Virginia, and as a researcher with the Urban Institute's Metropolitan Housing and Community Development Policy Center. We've got a great group of speakers ahead of us. Please welcome Laura Eldridge and Sierra Latham. Thank you.
All right, it's great to be back. I love coming to Beaufort and speaking to this group, and I am really thankful for the opportunity, and Sierra's really excited to be here too. I'm gonna start out with a discussion of kind of broader economic conditions, and then Sierra's gonna narrow into housing, and then we'll kind of both rejoin for Q&A at the end. And I'm going to go ahead and give our little disclaimer. This will cover both Sierra and I, but the views we're going to express are ours alone and don't represent an official position of the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond or the Federal Reserve System. Okay, so what's going on in the economy? You know, it's really interesting. I was looking back at my slides from last year, and you know, going into 2023, at the beginning of 2023, there was a lot of uncertainty. There were economists out there that were predicting a recession. There were a good many economic forecasts out there that were predicting a mild recession. There were other economic forecasts that were predicting a bit of growth. But if you look at kind of the overall average, it was about zero. I mean, last year, I basically told you guys, we were not seeing a recession in the data. The FOMC members that conduct monetary policy were never really predicting a recession. But we also weren't predicting, you know, we also weren't expecting kind of a strong year of economic growth. But that's actually what we had in the end. And this was really driven by consumer spending staying as resilient as it has, and I'll show you the data on that. But we ended up with very strong economic growth in terms of real GDP growth in the latter part of 2023. And so now the fears of recession have lessened. When I'm out going, doing these sorts of events, I have less people today trying to convince me we are in a recession than I had this time last year. But still, there are speed bumps ahead that could certainly impact the economy in a negative way. And our president says, Tom Barkin, he says, and I really like this, he always reminds people, nobody canceled the business cycle. We're going to have a recession at some point, but right now we're not seeing that in the data. The pace of job growth has been astonishing at a national level, and that's certainly true for the state of South Carolina. But employment growth in this part of the state has been lower, and I'll talk about why that is, and maybe it has a good bit to do with housing as well. But places like Charleston and Greenville in North Carolina, Raleigh have grown at a much faster rate in terms of employment than the rest of the state. And that's certainly true when you compare to the more rural places. So what we're really seeing is we're seeing this migration pattern. We all know about this migration pattern from like the largest MSAs, so like New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, to smaller metro areas and to kind of like the Sun Belt, this part of the United States. But we're also seeing movement of people from rural counties to more urban counties. So places like Charleston and Greenville are kind of getting this growth from both sides, as are you guys. Inflation remains well above the 2% average target. It's down to about 3%, but still that's a lot above 2% mathematically, especially. And I think this last 1 percentage point might be hard to get down. I'll talk about why that is. And if you listen to what our president, Tom Barkin, is saying, the other presidents, the Board of Governors, Jerome Powell, if you didn't see his interview on 60 Minutes, look it up when you get home tonight on the internet and watch it. It's a good interview. But if you listen to what they're saying, they are committed to getting inflation back down to the 2% target, and they will hold rates where they are, or raise rates if they're needed, or reduce rates if that's needed to get to that target. And I'll just go ahead and say now, and Sierra's going to dig more into this, but everywhere we go, and I go all over the state of North Carolina and South Carolina, housing is one of the main topics. I mean, I don't spend a day out in the Carolinas where housing doesn't come up. So this is GDP, and you can see that strong growth that we have on the far right there. This is real GDP. So this is the total value of all final goods and services produced in the United States in a given period of time. And when I say it's real GDP, that means it holds inflation constant. So this is the amount of stuff that we're producing, so goods and services. And you can see in the latter part of last year, we had very strong economic growth. It'll end most likely still being revised a bit Q4, but most likely we ended up about 3% for the year, which about 2% is a decent year for the US, so 3% is higher. You can see the FOMC projections on the far right. These are the people that are voting on monetary policy, including interest rate for the Fed. They make projections every other meeting on what they think is going to happen. And the gray bar is the range of projections. The red diamond is the median projection. So you can see that the median projection going forward is kind of around 2%, but maybe a little lower in 2024. These were done in December. I'm very eager to see the next round of projections because actually the data from December and January has come in very strong. So in December, holiday spending, retail spending was higher than expected. And then the jobs report in January, which I'll show you in just a second, was much better than expected. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see these expectations increase a little bit. This is consumption, and this is really what has kept us from having a recessionary period during kind of the post-COVID era. We had a very short recession, a one-quarter recession, which is about as short as they can get during COVID, like during April, May, that time period when COVID hit. So second quarter 2020. But after that, we have not had one. And really, it is because of the resilience, mostly because of the resilience of consumer spending. This is real consumer spending. So the way I like to describe this to people is you can think of it as how much stuff people are putting in their cart. So think about all the money you spend on goods and services every month. And what is incredible about this, the top line is total consumption, middle is what we spend on services, bottom is what we spend on goods. And what is amazing about this is even with the cumulative inflation that we have had, people have put more stuff in their cart. This goes against, on the surface, goes against kind of economic logic. Because we've had cumulative inflation over 20% during this period of time. So something used to cost $100 on average costs about $121 now. So that's a huge increase, right? That is much higher than we would normally have over a 3-year period. And so it's amazing that people put more in their cart. How have they put more in their cart? Well, there's really 2 reasons. The first is that big decrease you see in 2020. People pulled back significantly when COVID hit, partially because of fear. Partially because there were things you normally spend money on that you couldn't spend money on anymore. So maybe you like to go to the movies often and the movie theaters were closed for a period of time, or your favorite restaurants were closed. So you couldn't spend some money you would normally spend. And so what that did was that provided people some excess savings. That big decline you see there meant people had more money in their bank accounts. But the other thing that happened was the tremendous amount of stimulus that came into the economy. And some of you have heard me say this on the stage before, but it's really important to know that when I say that, people's minds jump straight to stimulus checks that went to low to middle income families. And there were stimulus checks that went to those families, but that represents a small percentage of the overall stimulus. So higher education institutions like USCB got kind of once in a lifetime funding via HERF. K through 12, you guys got once in a lifetime money through ESRA. Hospitals got a lot of money. State and local governments got a lot of money. There was a PPP loans. So those of you that have small businesses, you got a bunch of money through that program. So there was a lot of stimulus that flowed into the economy. In the long run, it's my opinion that that is what has kept consumption up. That's what kept us out of recession. Economic research is eventually going to tell us, was that a good idea? Like, was it worth it? Was it worth it to have all that stimulus to prop up the economy? You would find economists right now, I'm sure, that would say yes and no, but research will tell us that in the end. We'll have to wait a little bit for that. But you can see that services took a much bigger hit than goods. Goods, actually, very soon after COVID, people got less afraid of COVID itself and started buying stuff. Everybody in this room bought something between April and August 2020 that you would never have bought if COVID hadn't happened, right? For some people, that was like an RV or a kayak or somewhere you're like, get me out of my house. Chicken coops. Chicken coops. I think I've brought this up here before, but my purchase was doors because I have an open floor plan house and I also have 3 boys. And when they came home with me in this open floor plan house, I was like, if I don't create an office for myself to work, somebody's got to go. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. So I had to buy doors, and doors were hard to find because I was not the only person. So what was the price of the doors, you think? Was it a normal price for doors? No, it was extraordinarily expensive. And what do you think I did? I bought them. So did a lot of other people. And so the first inflation that we saw was goods inflation. People were buying goods, demand goes up, prices go up. That's what happens. Now we're seeing more services inflation because you can see services were slower to kind of gain steam. So demand, that story I just told about demand that came from excess savings and from stimulus, that's one way inflation can happen, right? Demand for something goes up, prices go up. We all know that, right? But the other way we can have inflation is from a supply shock, from supply declining, right? So if we find here all of a sudden that there's going to be, a few years ago, I don't know if this impacted Beaufort, but it did Rock Hill. We had that oil pipeline shut down, and so there was a shortage of gas. So people rush to go get gas, prices go up, right? During COVID, not only did we have an increase in demand, but we also had significant supply chain disruptions. And you can see this here with the supply chain index. This has now normalized. This is great news because the actions of the Fed are not going to impact this as much as it's going to impact demand, I think for pretty obvious reasons. But I will tell you, and this is just my view, this is not the Fed's view, but it is my view. I think the fact that inflation has come down as much as it has, but demand has remained strong, tells me that much of inflation was driven by this supply issue. Once again, we're going to have more research that'll come out on that. But the reason why I think this last little bit of inflation might be hard to tame is because this has normalized. So whatever came from kind of that supply shock scenario should have pretty much normalized at this point. So I think it's going to be harder to get that last bit. But this is good news because the Fed raising interest rates wasn't going to impact this very much. So it's great that it's kind of normalized on its own. One of the things that's really interesting and exciting for this part of the state, not so much the Beaufort proper, but further out, we might see some of this, is this growth in manufacturing, especially in the subsectors of computer, electronic, and electrical. This is everything related to EVs and everything related to data centers. There is so much money being spent in this space right now. It is unreal. I was up in Chatham County, North Carolina. That's where VinFast is coming. If you've heard of that company, Vietnamese EV company. Toyota is building an EV battery plant there that's going to have 9,000 employees. Y'all, there's no housing within, I went and drove by the site, which by the way is very much in progress. This is not a fantasy, this is happening. It's gonna be really difficult for those people to find housing. And one of the things I want you to think about as Sierra presents is that in that facility, there's in this little space between Boom Supersonic, VinFast, and Toyota, there are 15,000 jobs. 75% of those jobs are technician jobs. These are good paying jobs. They start off at about 20 bucks an hour, very little training, and can go up from there, right? Very quickly, you can be making $50,000 a year. But the houses that are being built there right now are like $400,000 plus houses because of the cost of land. So there's this mismatch between this right now is construction spending. This is going to turn into manufacturing jobs. And by the way, because all of this is being built and BMW is currently building a huge EV plant in Spartanburg, this stuff is happening all over the Carolinas. In Berkeley County, you've got Redwood Materials, which is EV battery recycling. All of these are included in this chart. When these transition from construction jobs to manufacturing jobs, we then have a pretty serious mismatch between the types of jobs that are available and the public infrastructure that's and housing infrastructure that's being built. This is employment. These last 2 months, blockbuster jobs months, I want you, whenever you hear that jobs report, to kind of think, okay, what does this mean? We need to add about 80 to 100,000 jobs a month to keep up with population growth and churn in the economy. So for me as an economist, if I hear a jobs report that's over 100,000, I think of that as the economy expanding. And if I hear one that's under 80,000, I think of it as a bit of a contraction. It doesn't have to be negative for it to be that the economy is contracting. So there's no doubt that anything over 200,000 is really a strong month, but over 300,000 is a very strong month. So we continue to add jobs at a fast pace. I will tell you that about 90% of the businesses that we talk to are still planning to hire in 2024. But this is staggering how many months in a row. And if we went back, it's now years of months in a row that we've added more than 100,000 jobs. So we have way more people working and way more jobs than we had pre-COVID. And you guys have heard me say on this stage, they've heard me talk before, The very unsatisfying answer to where are all the workers? They are working. That is unsatisfying because we also have a labor shortage. Those things can actually happen simultaneously. But the people that have long been working Americans are working. We also have people on the sidelines that aren't working that we have to engage. Those things can happen at the same time. Well, let me point out before I actually move on, even though we're far above where we were before COVID, we're not back to the pre-COVID trajectory nationally, and we're also never made it back to the pre-Great Recession trajectory. Recessions, especially severe ones, have long-lasting impacts. This is part of why the Fed is trying to keep the business cycle from being like this and make it more like this. You can't get rid of it, but you can kind of make it less severe. Beaufort County has even a bigger gap, actually, if you look at that pre and post pandemic trajectory. Now, we heard that population has grown a lot. And it is so important to note that population growth does not necessarily equal employment growth, because you guys have a lot of people moving to this area for the specific purpose of never working again. Right? I might be planning one of those moves one day. So I need you to encourage some young people to study healthcare related fields. Population growth is great, but when it is driven by people over age 65 and retirees, you do have this problem, right? Because guess what? Wealthy retirees spend a lot of money, and they demand a lot of healthcare services, and they want nice stuff. That's why they're moving here. And so also taking care of growing this working age population is really important. The Carolinas continue to lead the way across the district. I will tell you, I was in Annapolis, Maryland 3 weeks ago. I do a lot of work in the community college space, and the governor's budget for next year in Maryland cuts community college funding considerably, and they just found that out. So I was there for kind of this emergency meeting almost. And in Maryland, they have declining population. They still haven't reached pre-COVID employment. And so the conversation is, our population is declining, employment is declining, we have declining tax revenues at the state and local levels, and we are going to continue to have this over time, and so we have to shrink everything. That's the conversation. So different than my normal conversation in the Carolinas. So different. Where the conversation literally in South Carolina is like, we've got all these revenues that are coming in taxes. Is this gonna continue? This is above our expectations. What's gonna happen? Very, very different feel. So as difficult as growth can be, and I know it is stressful at times and it's difficult, that is a much better place to be than talking about how to shrink your economy. You do not want to be in that place. This is employment change by MSA, and I'll remind you guys are in the Hilton Head MSA, so that's where you live, and some of the data you're going to see Sierra present will also be MSA level data, because that's the level we can get certain data. Certain data are difficult to get at the county or city level. But this is a great example of employment growth not matching population growth. So Charleston, incredible employment growth, incredible population growth, but they're attracting retirees too, but they're also attracting a lot of workers, especially to the Berkeley and Dorchester side of their MSA. Hilton Head is tougher. And I will tell you, last year when I was here, that evening I stayed and I went to Hemingway's because somebody told me I needed to go there. And I met 3 young women that were nurses at Beaufort Memorial. I'm sure, and I immediately jump into economist. I'm sure they were thrilled they ran into an economist at the bar. I'm sure this was their plan for a fun night out. But I was talking to them and they loved living here. They loved their jobs, but they were all 3 moving because they could not find housing. And they said, we can't afford what we want. And what we can't afford, we don't want, and we don't want to have to drive really far. So they were going to leave the community, even though they loved it, even though they had great jobs. And by the way, nurses are highly paid. So what does this mean for people that aren't highly paid, right? So this is really a situation that you have to think about. And this is a new graph for us. It's my new favorite graph. This shows what this long-term labor situation is going to be like, really, and what it's like right now. This models worker demand, so how many jobs are there in the South Carolina economy, and worker supply, how many people are in the labor force. And we can start measuring this in 2001 because of the way certain data is presented. But what you'll notice is until 2017, there were always more jobs than there were people working. So if you had a business and somebody wasn't pulling their weight, you could get rid of that person and replace them pretty easily in that environment. Starting in 2017, that started changing, and all of us knew, like before COVID, labor was tight, but now it's even tighter. And the reality is, because of demographic changes, this is likely to get worse. So labor force participation rates are projected to fall pretty significantly between now and 10 years from now, and labor demand is expected to be strong. Now, labor demand could fall. We could have a severe recession, labor demand could fall, but we don't want that to fall, right? So this gap, unless we have a serious recession, this gap, if it's to be corrected, is going to have to be corrected by increasing labor supply somehow. I'll point, this is inflation. Like I said, it's come down a ton. It's come down faster than expected. I showed this graph last year. If you went back and looked at it, these projections of the FOMC were higher. So it's come down faster than the economists expected. Great news, but we're still at 3%. We got to get it that last little bit. I'll end by just showing you a couple things on housing, and then I'm gonna, Sierra can already come up, be coming up here. Housing starts and permits have increased some, but we have never recovered from the Great Recession. So this is the Great Recession, this is actually 2001 recession, and then here's the Great Recession, right? This is the 1990s average for how many houses we were building and how many permits were being pulled. And you can see the decline during the Great Recession was unbelievable, and we just have never recovered. And we didn't get above that 1990s average again until COVID. This decline is because of interest rates, and now it's increasing a bit more. We are not building enough housing in the United States. And one of the reasons for that, my job is to go out and talk to businesses every day. I talk to a lot of home builders. And when I ask them, why are you not building more houses or cheaper houses or more multifamily, there are a host of reasons, but the main reason is NIMBYism around them not being able to build the things that people can afford. And that should challenge all of us, right? Because we all sit here and say we want more affordable housing, all of that. But what is happening is when these people are trying to build it, it's getting blocked. And so this is a big issue across communities everywhere in the United States, but especially in communities that are very attractive places and where a lot of higher income people reside. And so places like Beaufort and especially the islands are gonna, have issues with this. And why do we care? Megan talked a lot about this, so I'm not gonna focus as much on it, but I will point out to you what Megan said. I loved that you talked about housing cost burden, because this is, we have this graph, but what this shows is what percentage of households are cost burdened. So this means rent plus utilities is more than 30% of your income. That doesn't even count all the other stuff you have to pay for your housing, right? And the unbelievable thing about this to me, as somebody that's lived in South Carolina for 17 years now, is that in South Carolina, that's Allendale County, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, Allendale County is the only place in the state where less than 20% of households are housing cost burdened. It's the only place. Now look at West Virginia. There's a lot of places there. Why? Supply and demand. Supply and demand. But the darker the color, the green is rural, the blue is urban. This is a big issue everywhere I go in the Carolinas. So I'm gonna pause there, and I'm gonna call Sierra up here to talk more about housing, and then I'll rejoin for Q&A.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm going to stay put, and oh, goodness gracious, that's very loud. That's not a bad thing. I'm pretty soft-spoken. We've got about, like 10, 15 minutes. I'm going to go pretty fast. So in general, I think that one of the important things to kind of remember is that kind of all housing is local. So as we kind of move through these, I'm going to focus on the Hilton Head MSA, which includes both Beaufort County and Jasper County. I'm also going to talk about both the rental market and the ownership market. And this slide kind of sets up why I want to talk about both of those. So what these two graphs show is how income and age relates to how likely a person is to rent. And this kind of, income and age are highly correlated. As you get older, you hope that someone starts paying you more for the skills that you've developed over time. But what we see is that as folks, when folks are kind of earlier in their career, when they're younger, they are a little bit more likely to rent than folks who are older. And then the same is kind of true. Lower income households are more likely than higher income households to rent. That's kind of the big thing we see here. One of the interesting things that I see from these two charts is just the difference between where Hilton Head MSA is relative to the nation. So you see that there are kind of across the income spectrum a smaller share of folks in Hilton Head who rent than who, there are a smaller share who rents than relative to the national level. And it's important to kind of remember that doesn't just include preferences. It's not that lower income folks prefer to own in Hilton Head than rent. What that has a lot to do with also is just the availability of rental housing relative to ownership housing. So both of those things kind of contribute to that difference. So this could be saying that folks here prefer to own than to rent relative to the national levels, or it could also mean that rental housing is scarcer relative to national levels. And I also kind of wanted to include this as kind of a level set, just to kind of emphasize that importance of rental housing to attract folks to live here who might be in occupations that are kind of on the lower end of the income spectrum. So, there we go. So, I know Megan kind of mentioned this in her comments earlier, but just to kind of reiterate, this is kind of what she said in her remarks, but in graph form. So this shows housing affordability by tenure. So here we've broken out renters, owners with a mortgage, and folks who own their homes free and clear. And I think that this should be pretty unsurprising. We just saw that lower income folks are more likely to rent than to own. Housing cost burden is higher for renters than it is for homeowners. But still about 53% of renters are housing cost burden in Hilton Head, and that's pretty similar to national levels. What we see is that owners with a mortgage are actually more likely than folks at the national level to be housing cost burdened. So about 34% of folks in the Hilton Head Island MSA are housing cost burdened relative to about 27% nationally. And so that's kind of one of the things that we should keep in mind is that the cost of housing, and that includes rent, or that includes the mortgage cost, that includes utilities, it also includes property taxes. Those things contribute to that higher rate. But then we also do see that there is housing cost burden among folks who own their homes free and clear. A lot of folks who own their homes free and clear are in their golden years, so their income has declined a little bit. That might be one of the things contributing here. But the expenses that go into owning a home free and clear, again, are utilities and property taxes. So this is kind of telling us that those two things are kind of opportunities to kind of pay attention to. The utilities part is particularly interesting because it relates to kind of the housing quality in some ways. So part of the driver of utilities costs could be efficiency of appliances and just the household overall. And what we know is that when housing quality starts to decline, when kind of the envelope starts to deteriorate, and all that nice cool air that you pump in during the summer months starts to just seep out, so your air conditioning's working extra hard, all that kind of adds to those utility costs. So that's kind of what's going on here, why people who have no mortgage payments still might end up having housing cost burden. So now that we've level set, just kind of wanted to talk about what's happening in housing costs nationally. And so what we see here is that there was really kind of a big change that happens in the past couple of years. So leading into 2020, we see that in general, year over year, housing costs, both in terms of rent and in terms of the owner's equivalent of rent, which includes, again, mortgage costs and all things go into that, is pretty stable. Generally speaking, it was about 3 to 4% for both of those measures. But then in mid-2021, those numbers started to to climb pretty rapidly. And that the high points there are around early 2023, CPI for rent rose to 9%, so year over year, rents increased by 9%, and ownership costs increased by 8%. And we've seen that they've started declining, but they're still high relative to pre-COVID trends. It's about 6% at the most recent estimates. And the other important thing to kind of remember there is that those costs, they compound. So the fact that it was really high for a while means that we're at a higher state of cost, generally speaking, now than we were. And so then I also kind of wanted to kind of look at what that kind of means in terms of local prices. And so these are kind of two data sets that allow me to kind of dig down to that local level in a way that the national numbers really can't. Here you might notice, like, if you go back with a fine-tooth comb, the national numbers are different than the ones I just showed you in terms of year-over-year increases. That's because I use different data sources. These ones are a better measure of what it's like for a person looking to move. So we have asking rent prices and home prices with these two measures. And so the CPI measures kind of what are people paying for housing. These ones measure what could you expect if you went and bought housing now? And we know that those are kind of two different things. So, you know, like I got into my apartment a little earlier. My year-over-year rent increase is a little bit more modest than someone who would be trying to move into my apartment this year relative to when I did. And so what we see is that rent in the Hilton Head Island MSA increased by about 28% in March of last year versus 16% nationally. So that's kind of telling us that housing price increases in Hilton Head are stronger in terms of rent than national levels. We see similar things with the housing price index, with the cost of ownership homes. We see that housing prices are up about 24 to 26% between January and March of 2023, versus about 20 or 21% nationally. And so, you know, I love a good index, but also I don't pay for things in indexes, and if you do, that's a weird way to live. So wanted to kind of break that down and kind of share what that means in like terms of actual amounts that you would pay for things. So what's kind of interesting about this is that before 2020, Hilton Head was actually, relative to national levels, a little bit more affordable, generally speaking. So, but that shifted around 2021. And so what we see here is that, you know, around that time, the two kind of oh gosh, words are hard. You know, at this point, the rent in Hilton Head is higher than national levels, generally speaking. And at the most recent estimate, kind of a typical rent that someone could expect to encounter is about $2,050. Megan mentioned that for someone earning the median income, $1,700 is about what they would have to, like that's the max they could pay without becoming cost burdened. And so $2,050 is kind of what you can expect. So there's about a $300 difference between those two numbers. To kind of put that in additional context, for someone to be able to afford a $2,050 rent payment, they would have to earn just a little bit over $82,000 a year. Again, which is something that I kind of want to let you sit with, just as you're kind of thinking about wages for some of the high demand jobs. So I know we're kind of running up on time, but do I have, okay. So until they like drag me off stage, I'm just gonna keep going. And especially as we're now getting into the ownership market, which is a little more complicated, but worth kind of paying attention to a couple of things. So this kind of shows us that single-family home prices are generally speaking above national levels. This looks at all single-family homes sold. And so on average, we have seen prices be about 10 to 20% higher than national levels through 2022. That jumped to 28% in 2023. So as of the most recent kind of estimate, the typical home sells for about $575,000, which if you put 20% down on that, and you have, let's just assume like a 5% interest rate, which is not realistic right now. We're going to talk about that in a minute. You would have to make about $137,000 to be able to afford that. If you're a first-time home buyer, the typical first-time home buyer actually puts 8% down as of 2023. If you put 8% down, you have to earn $163,000 in order to be able to afford that median-priced house. So again, just want to kind of let those numbers sit with you as we're kind of thinking through what this means in terms of affordability for folks who we might want to live and work in the Hilton Head MSA. But then again, home price is one of the things that drives affordability. Mortgage rates are the other thing. And as those of us who have been paying attention, which is I assume everybody at this point all know, mortgage rates were particularly low in 2021, 2022. That is kind of one of the things that kind of drove demand for housing. It's one of the reasons probably why prices for homes were so high, was because so many of us wanted to kind of get in on those low rates. But since that time, we've been in a different space. Interest rates have gone up. They went from about 3% during that 2021, 2022 era to 7.6% more recently, as of October of last year. That was kind of the high. And they've come down a little bit since then. But to kind of give you an idea, if we kind of look at the price of housing now and what we would need to earn to afford it in a 3% interest rate environment, you'd need to earn about $116,000 to $138,000, depending on how much you put down. If we use now prices in that 7.6% mortgage rate, we're looking at $168,000 to $199,000 if you're only able to put 8% down. So, the affordability for housing has gone down considerably because, again, both of prices and because of mortgage rates. And one of the tools that the Atlanta Fed puts out is their home ownership affordability tool, their home ownership affordability monitor. So I just lovingly borrowed this from them. And so this shows us kind of what share of income the median income household would need to pay in order to afford to purchase the median priced home. And the orange line is for Hilton Head and the green line is nationally. And so you can see they were pretty similar through about 2020, 2021. Hilton Head has increased substantially in recent years. And so that is both because of price increases, but more recently, interest rates have been playing a bigger role in the decline in affordability. So for those of you who don't have your binoculars, the top line tells us that the typical or median income household would need to spend 60% of their income on mortgage payments, property taxes, utility. Actually, though, this just includes mortgage and property taxes. This does not include utilities. So 60% of their income would need to go towards a fraction of their housing costs, relative to about 43% nationally. Which again puts kind of, if you can't own a home, a lot of folks go to rent. If there's not rental properties, then what are folks gonna do? And the answer is commute or find an opportunity outside of space. How are we doing? Megan, do you need me to? Okay, I'm getting thumbs up. I'm gonna keep going.
Stay if you can.
Yes. So I just have a couple more slides. So wanted to kind of, I've been told that one of the worst things about economists is that they can tell you what's wrong with everything, but don't usually focus on solutions. I have both an economics and a policy background, so I try to have some solutions as well. It's just kind of give you doom and gloom of data, and that I find really interesting. So one of the kind of ways we can resolve this issue is by building more units, building more housing. going back to economics, that kind of increases the supply, which we expect to kind of help prices moderate a little bit. And so what we see here, this is county level data, so a little different than what I've been showing you. So we're looking both at Beaufort County as well as Jasper County, since they're both included in the Hilton Head MSA. And we see that both have actually shown relatively strong year-over-year increase in rates of permitting. So that's number of units that have been permitted relative to 1,000 existing units. And then they also have relatively strong year-over-year change in the number of units. Beaufort County did something weird in 2020. I do not know what it is, but I'd actually love to hear kind of more about your perspectives and kind of what might be going on there. So kind of like the TLDR of this is really that it seems like there's a lot of kind of momentum and growth happening in the housing space in the Hilton Head MSA. And that is kind of manifested both in kind of permitting activity in terms of, how many units are approved to be built, but then that's actually translating to units actually being constructed. And we see that happening at a higher level than nationally. This is my last slide. And so what we see here is that this is kind of really to emphasize kind of that building structure, like what types of buildings are being permitted over time. And so the blue is single family homes. There's green in there somewhere sometimes. Those are duplexes, so homes that are about 2 to 4 units. They're small everywhere, but they exist. And then the yellow is going to be multifamily units. Now I said units, not properties, so a value of 1 in this chart is not one property with 50 units, and so you don't get a measure. This is actual units. And so, if there are 50 units in a property, that counts as 50 here, that's what we're seeing. And what we see is that generally speaking, there's a lot more approval happening for single family development than multifamily. And to put that in other terms, a lot of single family homes are used for rental. The build to rent is kind of an emerging market that has, kind of gaining strength, but a lot of rental properties are multifamily properties. And so if we want to kind of build the rental stock to kind of help bring those rent prices down for folks who might not be in a position to buy their home just yet, that we might want to kind of have working, this is kind of one of the things to pay attention to. And so generally speaking, multifamily units make up about 11% of units that are approved. And we saw a big kind of jump in approvals in 2021. About 1,000 multifamily units were approved that year at 27%. But then we kind of dropped back down to 9% in 2021. So thank you for sticking with me. I really appreciate it. And so I think that's,
we'll do some Q&A, but first, before anybody goes anywhere, because I know some people might have to leave, we have surveys we do every month for the Richmond Fed. This is part of how we prepare our president for FOMC. And if you are a small business owner, a CFO, a COO, CEO, any type of executive, you could be a business of one, and we would love to have you in our survey. This takes less than 5 minutes to do every month. And if you've ever thought, when you hear about the Federal Reserve not decreasing rates, gosh, I wish I could tell them what to do, this is your opportunity. But we would love to have you guys participate. We need more participants in South Carolina, and so I'm actively trying to help our team out with that. You can also text survey to 55444 if that's easier for you to do. But we're happy to take questions. I know some people might have to leave, but if you have questions, we're happy to take them. Nobody has a question? Okay, here we go.
You're talking in both rental communities and homeowner communities. You're talking the costs. Mm-hmm. There are so many HOAs with such a enormous monthly fee. Mm-hmm. How do you work that into what we've seen here today? And that's probably way too long to get into right now. But, there's also a buy-in to go into a community.
Yep.
Right, yeah.
The community I live in right now, it's a $35,000 buy-in, just to buy a house in it.
$35,000.
And then it's running $1,000, at least $1,000 a month.
Right, right. So you're kind of speaking to, so HOA cost is actually really important point, because I think those usually aren't included in any of the measures we include, but they can be substantial. When you're thinking about, can I afford this mortgage, you know, the mortgage calculator that I use to do kind of the what can you buy with this amount of housing, you know, math, so that kind of stuff is fun for me. It included the HOA cost in there. So, you know, it's kind of like what I was saying with the homeownership affordability. You would have to, the median income home would have to spend 60%, but we know it's actually more because it includes HOA fees, it includes utilities. And so those are kind of invisible in a lot of ways. And so I think that, you know, that's an unsatisfying answer because the answer is just higher and worse, but that's the truth of it. And then you also spoke to kind of this buy-in cost. And so, you know, we talk about, you know, how much you have to put down relative to the cost of the home. That's kind of an easy way to think about that. And when we think about affordability of home ownership, I think that we talk about it in terms of income, but wealth also plays a huge factor in it, and that doesn't get talked about enough. And so, you know, the amount that you have to put down is pretty substantial, and you have to accumulate that over time, which means housing costs have to stay low enough for you to afford a down payment in the first place to get into homeownership. But then also when we talk about that, it is those other costs. Closing costs are not included in that down payment number. And also, you know, you said there's kind of buy-in for the community, so you have to put down money in order to get into the community in the first place. Yeah. So those contribute to home ownership from the wealth side of things, as opposed, even though wealth and income are deeply correlated, than the kind of income side of things where we usually talk about
The other thing I would say is, you know, as an economist, I don't know if this is on, if I can use this, but
yeah.
Oh, it is on now. Okay. So I in my bio, part of what I'm interested in is taxes, state and local taxes. And there's a lot of people that are anti-tax but pro fine and fee.
Laura?
A fine and a fee is a tax, right? So if they're charging you a fee to get your community, I mean, that's a tax that community is charging you. That's probably a private company. But there's also a trend across South Carolina to pass impact fee. Those are taxes. Those are anti-development taxes. But a lot of the people that are anti-tax or pro-impact, it's very interesting. Oh yeah, it's very interesting. So,
As kind of in the same idea, when you were talking of new development.
Right.
In Columbia, they just broke ground, Volkswagen, for their new Scout.
Yes, Scout Motors in Columbia, he's asking about, yeah.
And talking with a client on Tuesday, going to work for them, they're hiring already.
Right.
He's looking an hour
Commute, yeah.
because he can't afford to.
That's right, yeah, he's talking about the Scout Motors. I mean, that goes along with that other story I was telling you, right? I mean, the idea that if you make $50,000 or $60,000 a year, you have to live an hour away from your job is outrageous, right? I guess maybe they're going to need those electric vehicles for those commutes. Uh-huh. Yes. Yes.
It's not just because we live somewhere.
No.
Everywhere because the number of people.
Correct. It's worse here because of the number of retirees that move in. But this is the thing I like to do. Sierra's never seen me do this, I don't think. Okay, I want you to raise your hand if one of your grandparents had 4 or more siblings. At least one of your grandparents had 4 or more siblings. Okay, raise your hand if one of your parents has 4 or more siblings. Raise your hand if you have 4 or more siblings. Raise your hand if you yourself have 4 or more children. Okay, thank you, thank you. That's the issue, right? And there's some people saying I have 0 and that's by choice, and there are more people making that choice. And there's a whole host of reasons why people have had less children over time, but one of the main ones is the expense. How expensive childcare is, how expensive a house is, right? They're thinking I can only afford this 1,200 square foot thing. I don't want to put 3 kids in that. So it's an issue. It's an issue. We've been below replacement rates with fertility since 1970. But it got much worse after the Great Recession. It never rebounded. Typically, you have a recession, fertility rates fall, and then they bounce. They never bounced. So one of the scary things for higher ed and employers right now is what's called the 2025 cliff. The 2025 cliff is where starting in 2025, 18 years after 2007, we have fewer people graduating from high school every single year after that, which also means fewer people going to college. That also means fewer people going into workforce. The military is very worried about it. Everybody should be worried about it, and those numbers are not getting better. There are things that could be done. Now, there are some countries who have paid people to have babies. As an economist, that sounds like a terrible idea. The right people do not respond to that incentive, but there are child tax credit changes that could be made. They're actually debating that right now. There are child care subsidies. There are things that could be done to encourage people to have more kids. But one of the main issues is that people are waiting longer to start families, and so they're having fewer. But while that is all happening, the baby boomers are now retiring. The youngest baby boomers were born in 1974, so we're rapidly coming up on all baby boomers being retired. And that's when that gap really between labor supply and labor demand probably really takes off. It should be important to all communities to recruit working age individuals.
So, one and then two.
Good morning, Eric Berman here. Thank you for coming and doing this. We definitely really appreciate it. I have a dumb kind of thesis that I want you to talk about, if that's okay. The thesis being that recessions usually lag expectations. Some ideas that maybe could back that up is that in past recessions that have been prompted by rate hikes, they've taken 8 to 18 months post the ending of rate hikes.
Yeah.
I think that goes back to World War II data. You could also look at senior loan officer opinion surveys and continued contraction in what they're willing to give out in credit. A few other notes related to that would be things like, you talked about the strong consumer. Initially, you could probably attribute that to better savings because they spent less, but also received some stimulus. Some of that continued expenditure, from what I can tell over the past 6 to 8 months, was post a depletion of savings and a growth in consumer credit or consumer debt. What happens when?
Yeah, this is a great question.
So how do you?
Yeah, so I would say a couple things. Number one, I agree with the first part of what you said, but the part I don't agree with is that typically by this point, we would see other things in the data that are pointing towards things moving kind of awry. So the recession isn't called until 8 to 18 months after, but there's other things that are starting to change. There is nothing in the data that look like that right now. Now, that does not mean I can't wake up tomorrow morning and look at the news and call Sierra and be like, oh my God, I just said the dumbest thing on the stage yesterday because X just happened. The saying is economic expansions typically don't die of old age, they're murdered. So a typical recession is caused by something you do not see coming.
Does it change in sentiment?
Sentiment's getting better.
But that's exactly my point. If you look at right before 2008.
Yeah, but 2008, you cannot, so like you mentioned consumer credit. Consumer credit's up a little bit, but it's back to where it was. If you adjust for inflation and income, it's back to where it was in 2019, which is half of what it was in 2008. So all the data are looking like what is actually happening with consumption. Now, let me just note really quickly, and I know we're way over time, so we'll close with this, but because this is important. And that consumption data you saw is being driven by high-income families. High-income families still have a lot of excess savings. And the reasons they have a lot of excess savings really is probably driven by the PPP loans that went mostly to trickle down to high-income families, but also asset values are up so much. So the homes people are living in are worth a lot more. The stock market has done incredibly well over the past few years, so asset values are up. So wealthier people are spending a ton of money. Low-income people have pulled back. We talk to grocery stores, we talk to other people that serve a wide array of customers, and they're seeing the lower-income people have pulled back. Middle-income people are substituting down, which means like instead of buying Honey Nut Cheerios, you buy the grocery store brand. But wealthier people are still continuing to spend like crazy. Now, here's the question I have. Does it ever, like, how far do we have to go for it to start showing up in the macro economy for that higher income slowing to come down? The reality is that most households have not been hit by and this is why what this time is so different than every other time you mentioned before, and why I think we can't compare it to that at all. Households have not been hit by these interest rate increases. And what I mean by that is most of us in this room, if you own a home, are locked into a very low interest rate mortgage. You're locked into a low interest rate car payment. And so, and credit card usage as a percentage is lower than it was any time before the Great Recession, since credit cards started anyway. So household debt is still not even, it's barely back to where it was in 2019, even with the huge increases in interest rates, which is kind of strange. But if you think about your own budget, if you haven't moved during this time period, you're still locked into that low interest rate environment. That would never have been the case before because we did not have such a low interest rate environment. And so some sectors, commercial real estate has been devastated, but households in general, especially owner-occupied households, have not been hit in the same ways. So I'll just close with that, and thank you so much for your time and attention.
All right, thank you, Laura and Sierra, for joining us today. I'm sure everyone has a few key takeaways. I took some notes. My 4 takeaways are: the builders in the room, we need more housing. The bankers, we need lower interest rates. The entire audience needs to get younger. And finally, our retirees within our region need to get back to work to reduce that labor gap. And I'll test that theory out when I talk to my parents today. One last thank you to all of our sponsors that made today possible, especially our presenting sponsor, Melissa, at the Coastal Community Foundation. Megan, do you have anything else to wrap up before we wrap up? All right, I appreciate everyone coming today. Thank you. Have a great Friday and have a great weekend.